Hi everybody, welcome to the 2022 eAA end of year wrap up. It's really good to be here with everybody and to have this sort of end of year look back at what has happened through 2022, and also to hear from Professor Dr. Ger Graus OBE, who's delivering this year's end of year wrap up keynote, which we'll get to very shortly. So the running order for today is I'm going to give you a quick introduction to the eAA, in case you haven't come across us before, as I'm sure many of you will have done. I'm then going to hand over to Professor Dr. Ger Graus OBE to give us his keynote presentation. We'll then take some questions. So do think as he's presenting of any questions. I'll tell you how to share those with us so that we can ask those to the professor, and then I'll finish off the session by looking back at some of the key activities that have happened this year, and also give you a sneak preview into what's happening next year. And then to finish everything off, we're going to be announcing the winner of this year's People's Choice Award, which is a brand new award category for 2022. So that's what's coming up. Without further ado, just to give people who aren't familiar with the association a quick overview of who we are. So we are a not-for-profit professional membership body, which is all about trying to promote a better understanding of best practice in the use of technology in all forms of assessment. And that's from formative to summative assessment, from multiple choice questions delivered on screen through to e-portfolios and case studies and offline work that then is uploaded and assessed on screen. So right across the gamut, from primary schools all the way through to universities, professional and work-based learning. We've got a membership now of nearly 3,000 people, and they come from all over the world, from countries as far away as New Zealand and Australia, from Africa, India, right across the globe, and of course here in the UK too. If you're not a member of the association, it's completely free to join as an individual. So please do think about signing up if this is an area that's of interest to you. Just go to our website, which is e-assessment.com, and you'll see a join now link in the right hand side. All of the work that we do is supported by our sponsors, and so it's one of the reasons that we don't charge for individual membership is we have our corporate sponsors, who you can see on the screen at the moment, who support the work that we do, allow us to deliver all of the activity and the work in this area to our members and the wider e-assessment community. So I'd like to extend a really big thank you to all of the organisations you can see on the screen for the support that they've given to the association through 2022. It's an interesting time at the moment, looking at how we can use technology to provide more rigour and resilience to our learning and assessment approaches. And of course, many of these companies deliver solutions that enable you to do that. And it's topical because the theme for this year's keynote presentation is looking at how effective technology can be at supporting learning and assessment. So all of the organisations on the screen, a big thank you to all of you. They range from technology providers through to exam awarding bodies and even exam regulators. We're really grateful for all the support that they give us as an association. So now we move to the main event. Our keynote presentation for this year's end of year wrap up is from Professor Dr. Ger Graus OBE, who I'd like to introduce to you at this point. Ger, thank you very much for joining us and agreeing to give this keynote presentation. I'll let you introduce yourself properly in a minute, but as I say, very, very grateful to you for joining us. And if you have got questions for the professor at the end of his keynote presentation, you can put those to us. Either, it depends how you're watching this. If you're watching it on YouTube or on LinkedIn, then just use the comment feature within those two platforms. If you want to, you can also tweet us the questions just using the hashtag eAssess, as is shown on the screen, and we'll then get those questions to Professor Dr. Ger Graus so that we can discuss those at the end of his presentation. But that point, Ger, I hand over to you, and look forward to listening to the presentation and then exploring it a little bit afterwards with you.
Thank you very much, Matt, and thank you for having me. I'm over the moon to be here, and to be with your colleagues. It's a slightly perhaps misleading title, the EdTech through a different lens. I'll explain in a little while, in a few seconds, what I do, but I travel a lot with my work, and it means that I attend a lot of conferences and exhibitions globally, and I see, therefore, a lot of EdTech in that field. And I've concluded really for myself that there is too much tech and not enough ed, really, and I'm promised all sorts of things by the tech that I then sometimes find lacking in the ed. Anyway, we'll come there. Hopefully, it'll make sense in a little bit. So this is me, Alex Beard. My good friend called me Jean-Jacques Rousseau meets Willy Wonka. That will do. I'm a German teacher, secondary trained. I became a head of faculty, then became an advisor, introduced languages into primary schools, and accessed lots of European money. Accessed lots of European money to train loads of teachers. Joined the dark side, became an inspector for a while, then became Anakin Skywalker again, and we're now towards the late 90s, and the Blair government, which came in, put a lot of money into education and tried certain things differently. So I became the director of 2 education action zones in South Manchester, near Manchester Airport, the Wythenshawe area, now also known as Marcus Rashford Land, and then really moved from that school thing into out of school and out of school hours, and I became the founding CEO of the Children's University, which went global, and was then asked to join Kidzania, and became the global education director for Kidzania. Kidzania, I'll come to it in a little while, but I speak about research, are cities built for children where they can experience the world of work, age 4 to 14. So that's kind of who I am. That's what I do. I'm a dad of 3, and I've got 2 dogs. They're with me. I've got a pigeon up the chimney. There's building work going on across the road, and I'm wearing my Netherlands tie. So what can go wrong today? I have a little video I'd like you to watch, and then we'll take it from there.
Training fleas requires a glass jar with a lid. The fleas are placed inside the jar, and the lid is then sealed. They are left undisturbed for 3 days. Then, when the jar is opened, the fleas will not jump out. In fact, the fleas will never jump higher than the level set by the lid. Their behaviour is now set for the rest of their lives. And, when these fleas reproduce, their offspring will automatically follow their example.
So that's it, and please hang on to that for a minute, because I'm going to come back to that jar in a second. I think that's where we're at in schooling terms, and I'd like to draw the distinction between schooling and education. Schooling, Monday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday, Friday in most countries, 9 to 4, 192 days per year. Education from the second you're born till the second you pass away. Schooling serves education. I can educate myself better if I'm well schooled. That's kind of, in simple terms, how I see things. I'd also like you, please, to have in your mind a few questions as I go along. The first one is, what's all this got to do with technology? So if you keep asking yourself that. And the second one, if you think of jigsaws of partnership, and particularly post-COVID, that thinking that we can do things alone, my EdTech product will solve all your problems, it's just not there. And then I think we also need to think about more than, and I'll come to that in a little bit. The jar that we just saw is essentially the definition of insanity. We keep on doing the same thing. We're expecting different results. Yeah, if you actually think about schooling over the last 30, 40 years, not much has changed. We brought in some technology, but use it in quite a limited way in terms of its actual potential. And we keep doing the same things. If you struggle with maths, I'll give you a bit more. You can come after school. You can come to Saturday clubs, but we keep doing the same thing. Also, I have to say at this moment in time, on my travels globally, I ask children one question. And my question is, why did you go to school? And the answer I get, I would say about 80% of the youngsters is because I have to. And I think it's a sad and a bad answer. And maybe technology will be able to help us with some of that. What I don't see in our schools is this. Lucy was then 3 years old, and her mum sent me that picture, and she is dancing with Anna Pavlova at the Kelvin Grove Art Gallery and Museum in Glasgow. Lucy is learning. Lucy is enjoying. Lucy is looking at a role model. She is imagining. She is aspiring. She's got this whole mix of things on her plate of a young life, and so Lucy is learning. Whereas you might begin to argue and think that schools are places where children are taught. And when we test what they have been taught, we need to ask ourselves whether that's actually education or whether that is regurgitating what they've been given. And don't get me wrong, been given very, very, very often by brilliant teachers, because otherwise I suspect many of them would vote with their feet. When I'm asked what I think schooling and education's all about, that's my answer. The mind, once enlightened, cannot again become dark. And I particularly saw this with Children's University and later with Kidzania and through research, that the connect between learning out of school and being taught in school is often about purpose, understanding all of a sudden when they connect well. That's why I'm doing this. So it allows me to do these things better. And that's when the light goes on. And once that's on, you can't turn it off again. You cannot unknow things and unexperience things. Back to the jar, back to Wythenshawe, Marcus Rashford Land, where I asked lots of children the jobs that they could do at the airport. And the answer I got from very young children to older ones were the things they could see, which is about 55% of the jobs in an airport. The 45% you just can't see. They're behind closed doors. So you can't aspire to 45% because you don't know that they exist. And then I asked those youngsters, look, you can look up, you can see the aeroplanes, you can fly planes, you know. And the answer I got from very young children was that people from here don't fly planes. So there's your jar. It's limited and it's got a lid on it. And I don't think that in what we're doing in schools at the moment and what we're testing and how we're assessing actually does anything about that. Part of the issue for me is that my favorite book, The Little Prince, all grown-ups were once children, but only few of them remember it. So when we talk about children and young people, when we deal with them in terms of their behaviors, their expectations, and our trust, I think we forget sometimes what it was like when we were 14 or 16 or 8. Yeah, and I think that's really sad. And we have to remind ourselves as teachers, as parents, co-educators, that we were once that age. So I hear this stuff, an example. I hear a lot of children are always on their phone. They're always on their phone. You know, my daughter, she leaves the school and she comes home and instantly she's on FaceTime with her friends. And I'm kind of thinking, well, hang on a minute. But when I left school, I used to go home. I used to sit on the stairs. We had a phone that was attached to the wall and it had a kind of cord bit on it. But my mother used to say, you've only just seen your friends and now you've come home and you're on the phone again to them. So I don't think much has changed, except that I think our youngsters now have better technology than I have. Let's just watch this video very quickly.
I'm one of the few female pilots. I've been to America, Spain, and I love every minute of it. Air traffic control has cleared us for takeoff. Okay, let's go. People, property, and postcodes. I call it the 3 Ps. Hello, Mrs. Smith. How can I help you? I have won lots of awards. When I was a school child, I was directing my school play. It's not a job, it's a calling. A Romeo. A Romeo. They see surgery as an art form. It's vital to keep a cool head. Scalpel? I'm a bit of a petrol head. I could have been a doctor, but I prefer cars. What's not to love?
And we are live in 3, 2, 1.
Good morning, and welcome to the 9 o'clock news.
Kidzania, London, a city made just for kids aged 4 to 14.
So that's just one of them. There are about 25 of those globally. And the reason I bring this up is because we did a piece of research which involved technology. But it wasn't intended in that way. We kind of discovered it and then moved on. And it links to a point I want to make later on about our assessment and our knowledge. And I don't think that what do we know about our children in school? We know their potential. We know their potential grade. We know their attendance. We know whether they are well behaved. We know whether they are gifted and talented or whether they've got special needs, and we know some other circumstances. As our youngsters get older, we know them less well, partly because our schools get bigger, but also our system becomes very compartmentalized, whereas in primaries, this is slightly better, and in some cases, much better. So what did we do at Kidzania? Kidzania, when you come to Kidzania, you, as a child, you get a bracelet, a security bracelet, so that we can track where you are. And inside the Kidzania, the intention is that the adults don't interfere. So the choices are made by the children. So I sat down with some analysts and asked them the question, I want to know what the first choice is of a large group of children on their first school visit to a large number of Kidzanias globally. Our global sample now stands at around 560,000, I think. And so they did, sorry, this is kind of slightly playing up here, I think. There we are. So they did this research, and then my question became, well, now that we know what the first choices are, now tell me who the children are. Are they 4? Are they 14? Are they boys? Are they girls? Are they black? Are they white? Are they rich? Are they poor? Are they urban? Are they rural? Which country are they from? And the analysis was done by a large number of people, because we were onto something here I thought that was really important. So we got lots of universities and other organizations involved in this. And the key findings were as follows. First finding was that all stereotypes were set at the age of 4, and we suspect earlier. So just a simple example, every Kidzania has an aeroplane, 2 activities, cabin crew, pilot. Pilot activity, 90% boys, 10% girls. Cabin crew, the reverse. Maternity unit, girls. Transplant, heart transplant or liver transplant, whatever it is, boys. And so it goes with stereotype. Yeah. And we also found that there was almost no change between 4 and 14, which begins to ask some questions about STEM education. And the answer, which I got from the politicians, was, but we're doing much better in the sciences now than we did in tests. And girls are outperforming boys. With all due respect, has nothing to do with STEM. Because what also happens is that when those young people make their future careers choices, they revert back to stereotype, because the young black girl may never have seen a black female pilot, for example. The next finding was, which kind of made me think a lot as a dad of 2 girls, was that almost all girls choose activities below the age range. 9-year-old girls choose 7-year-old activities. 9-year-old boys choose 9 or 10-year-old activities. And clearly there must be an issue of confidence, self-esteem, and those kind of things sitting behind this. And then the final finding was that children can only aspire to what they know exists. If you come from a socioeconomically deprived background, then the children from there who come to Kidzania will never choose the aeroplane, the operating theatre, the television studio, the radio station, or the theatre as their first choice. They will choose the supermarket, making beds in a hotel, being a courier, or being a window cleaner. And that goes back to that children can only aspire to what they know exists. And also there was a final finding, which is interesting, is that globally there's almost no difference between the youngsters, the choices and the behaviors and choices in terms of the youngsters from Mexico and Moscow and from Dubai to India and London. So here we have technology used in a way that gets us to understand our young people better and should lead us to think differently about how we now teach my class of 10 boys and 10 girls, for example. And you have a means of finding things out that actually helps you become a better teacher because you know your children better, and helps the children become better learners because you can build different kinds of scaffolding around groups of children and individual children. You may argue it's a form of assessment that actually makes a difference rather than merely gets reported. I wanted also to come to something that sits in our thinking about what we assess, what our schools are for. Because in a sense, I think, and I have this conversation quite a lot with people, and with people like Estelle Morris, for example, the former Secretary of State for Education, is, well, why do we test? And we have this thing about, here's the government, it has a national curriculum that it wants the schools to deliver, and in the schools, the teachers do this. So then we inspect the schools to see how well they deliver the government agenda, and we look at the teachers to see how well they do that. You then give you the license to go and buy an outstanding banner, which you can put outside your school. So you are, in Ofsted terms, outstandingly compliant. You could have that conversation for a very long time without mentioning the word child wants. The picture you see is of a school during COVID. In those boxes, 400 every day, is children's work and food. And the school is much more than a school, because that particular school, like so many others, are owned by their community. Barcelona Football Club's motto is Més que un club, more than a club, because Barcelona is owned by its membership. I think that post-COVID, we have a brilliant opportunity to create more than a school and to actually serve our children and our communities together, empower them to become stronger, more independent, striving for their own successes. And how do you measure that then? What tests are you going to apply for this? We need to rethink how we do these things. We need to think about us as teachers and everybody else who works in the school and all the parents and grandparents and the whole community as role models. Yeah, because actually school improvement isn't just about the grades, it is about better people, isn't it? And children and young people look and copy, and we need to be mindful that we are the heroes. My now 27-year-old daughter, up to the age of 4, I was everything. It was daddy, 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 and daddy. And at the age of 4, Mrs. Poole took over and I was completely lost. We need to recognize our importance in this. How do you measure that? We need to think about equity and equality as a starting point, not as an afterthought. And I think that's what we do. We think of it too much as an afterthought. So how do you measure that? And nobody should have to play second fiddle. I wonder what that young man was told during his life when he grew up. I wonder who told him that he would be able to play the cello with his foot. I'd be fascinated to find out what the story behind that is and how he was empowered and what data was used, what information was used to drive him. We need to recognize that there are experiences out of school that are as valuable as what goes on in school, and that those experiences link with what goes on in school. We need to measure, as I did with Children's University through Cambridge University, the impact of out of school hours learning. We need to actually measure it and stand it up and say, this is what works. This is really good practice. We need to also, in our world, think about technology. We need good technology, or do we need technology for good? I would argue we need technology for good. Good technology is very shiny and very flash. Technology for good makes a difference. And actually, what good is any technology if we had schools at the start of COVID in the more deprived areas of the country where 35% of the children had no internet access at home? So all we're doing is actually making the gap between have and have not and can and cannot greater. The school as a place of trust. Our children, my youngest daughter, she's 17, in a lower sixth, and much of the work that she does is around finding out what the truth is and who to trust. And we as schools, if our politicians don't do it, we as schools need to stand there. Truth is, of course, the second T that lies in this. And it's quite hard, isn't it, to find out what the truth is these days. They will come to us as the benchmark. And transparency is, for me, the third T. We need to think about that our children are all different and that our areas of the country are all different. And therein lies this wonderful book by David Winner called A Brilliant Orange, which is about Dutch football. But he has this really great thing in there that he says, if you give a child from the Netherlands a piece of paper and a pencil and you ask them to draw the horizon, they will draw a straight line, because that's what it is. And if you give a child from Sheffield, which is where I'm at the moment, a piece of paper and a pencil, there will be hills in there somewhere, and in other places there will be high-rise buildings and whatever. The point being is that we are all different. Our environments are all different. And a national curriculum, if we're not very careful, and national testing is not necessarily doing us all favors. The one thing that is absolutely clear from COVID, you know, all those futurists who were saying we won't need teachers in the future. Well, you know what? You were wrong. It doesn't mean that the role of our teachers won't change. It doesn't mean that, you know, there's this question, who is the teacher, the parent as the co-educator, all those things. But teachers are here to stay. So treat them well, give them a good pay rise and all that, because they're here to stay. And I'm very, very excited about that. We need to understand the partnership part. A child's education is an impact partnership, and teachers need to look at not just answers within, but they need to look to others outside who can help the child to learn better and to achieve greater. Careers education would be a really good example. I know nothing about careers, but I'm quite good at bringing loads of people in who do, right? And the same applies to all sorts of other subjects. Really important. I'm happily woke. I think we need more empathy. I think we need to recognize that our children are growing up in difficult times. And I think we need to tell them that that's okay. And we need to try as much as possible to lead by example, but we also need to get them to understand that we too sometimes struggle. How do you measure that? I think we need to be brave as teachers and as schools. We need activism, climate change on the curriculum as a natural science, and then testing about it. So what? Actually, the aim of that should be to create a few million Greta Thunbergs. We need to think of schools as places of hope. So please get rid of your outstanding banners and put hope next exit in their place. And we need to measure what we value rather than value what we can measure. And if some of that can be done online, if some of that can be done in electronic format, brilliant. But sometimes with some of the examples and small stories I've just told, that's not possible. So I think it'll be hybrid, I think is the word. And we need to decide collectively what's important. We need to be in charge of that, not people in an office in sanctuary buildings. We need to think about working with business and the world of work as an involvement rather than an investment, and we need to change their mindsets. They will never recruit the people they need if they don't work with us. It's a point we need to make time and time again. And as my wife, who's a head teacher, always says, every child is everyone's responsibility. Everybody has a part to play. I was asked fairly recently what I would want for my 3 children as part of education. And my answer was that I want them to cope with the unexpected items in the bagging area of life. Because that's what skills do, don't they? They make you braver, they make you more courageous, they make you more accomplished, they make you more confident to take things head on, rather than certainly perhaps my generation, which would then sit back and do as we're told. And I see my kids going that way, and it makes me very happy. I wholly subscribe to most of the things that OECD says, but particularly this one. It's about the people, the whole person who leaves us, not about the linguist or the geographer or the mathematician, but everything that goes with that. And when it comes to the future of education, this much debated topic, the future depends on what you do today. It's not something that is just going to turn up. We've got the future in our hands. And if we want decent people, if we want our young people to be decent people, we need to do something about it and help them. And finally, we're going to get things wrong. It's okay. Yeah, we should not have organizations like Ofsted that tell us that we're failing if we get it wrong sometimes. It's okay to get it wrong, provided that we are capable of learning our lessons and then try to put it right. And I know I've gone slightly over time. I apologize profusely. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Ger. That was, well, I was going to say insightful and stimulating. I think those words probably don't do it justice. It's really interesting as a topic to look at how we try and help and support and nurture our students as they go on a learning journey, because that is what it is. And I was struck by several things that you said about, schooling serving education. I think that's, absolutely the case, isn't it? But it's often lost in translation when we start to think about the different, schooling journeys that people go on, and that they are a continuous piece as they move through their educational and working lives. The other thing that struck me before we start to talk a little bit about questions was that bit that you were talking about, kids saying, why do I have to go to school? Well, because I have to. And it struck me, and I was listening to something that a professor from America, Scott McLeod, profession of educational leadership at the University of Colorado, was saying in another event a few weeks ago. He was saying that our kids have tasted the honey and they have no interest in going back to what was. And that, I think, is a really, really important thing for us to think about, particularly in this post-pandemic period where our kids have been exposed across all of the age spectrums. People have been exposed to working at their own pace and having online learning and online assessments, all of that kind of stuff. So why do we immediately jump back to the way that it was? And often I think and I had a conversation yesterday with the CEO of a very large awarding body, and he was saying, I don't understand why we have this intent on looking at what's happened and how we fix that, rather than looking forward and saying, what's the future? What do we need to do in order to equip our learners on that future journey? And maybe it is that default set that we have in our mind that takes us back to the 19th century education system that we know and and trust, to pick up another theme from your presentation, and we don't trust the new stuff that we could be using, and that's where the EdTech comes in to enable us to be able to do stuff better for the future. So yeah, reflections there on some of the things you were saying. I suppose one of the things that would be interesting just to understand from your perspective is where have you seen good examples of EdTech being used to support this move into a better future of educational space? Because I know you travel around the world, you see lots of examples of different education systems. Is there any one example that you could draw out for us where you've seen technology really helping achieve that goal of equipping students for the future?
I think there are. I think that yes is the answer, and you actually don't have to look very far, despite all my travels. I would say it. I know it around where I am, and you will around where you are. Firstly in schools, often primary schools, that know their children very well, because actually EdTech isn't a one size for all thing either, right?
No.
So because in the end, it is there to serve the child and to help the child serve her or himself.
Yes.
And in a sense build that. So it's part of a personalization, because actually what is it meant to do? It's meant to make it better, more enjoyable. If it comes to assessment, maybe even more accurate. It's meant to add awe and wonder, but only to the awe and wonder that I like. So little Lucy at Kelvin Grove would have a very different EdTech wish, perhaps, than other children. And so there is that side to it. And you find schools, brilliant schools like that all over the world. Right? And I personally think there should be an optimum size on schools anyway. But then we're into education decisions rather than economic ones. I think the other side of it, you will find brilliant technology and the use of technology in classrooms where the teachers and other staff in the school, and sometimes older students, have been afforded the time and the resource to be trained properly. Because there seems to be kind of some assumption that this can just happen.
Yes.
And that strikes me as just plain daft. I mean, I know we're good as teachers, right? But I draw the line somewhere. I was chatting with my on a different program broadcast yesterday with my very good friend Tandy Tutu. We're talking about her dad, Desmond Tutu, and there were two things in that. Now Tandy's my age, and Tandy basically calls herself I am a BBT, born before technology.
Yeah.
And at the same time, she was telling me that even at the ripe old age of 87 and 88, her dad used to send her emails back correcting the spelling in them. So there's all that, right? But whiz kid teachers, and I would not be one of those who have the confidence to say with a bunch of youngsters, let's just travel somewhere. Where shall we go today? Yeah? Actually, I would quite like to see the teacher who says, have you got your mobile phones on you? Shall we use them?
I remember something on that point, actually, talking to Stephen Heppel about him going into schools and getting some really creative stuff going, and then saying to the kids, okay, well then let's use your phones, because they've got cameras on. Let's take a record of this. And of course, all of the kids just sitting there, sort of stunned silence, not knowing quite what to do, because of course the school banned them from using phones. But then going on to say, well, one brave kid said, well, we haven't got phones, sir, we're not allowed phones. And he said, well, of course you've all got them, haven't you? And then, plucked out of different parts of clothing came the sacrificial phone in case they got caught, so they were able to move forward. But why is the technology hidden like that? Why isn't it embraced? Because we hear all too often schools particularly, but other education institutions as well, saying, well, we haven't got the budget for equipment, computers and laptops. Well, actually, many of, not all, but many of the kids will have that automatically with them, except they're banned from using it. So I know it's a challenge.
I also think, Matt, as a point there, I think there are, I don't quite understand. I look at my 17-year-old who is kind of who was born with an iPhone in her hand, and I think her first words were, "What's the password?" or something, right? But literally along those lines. Why aren't we actually using those youngsters to teach younger ones how to do it? And the teacher becomes the kind of supervisor, make sure it's safe and all those. And we should pay them. Why would we not do those things? Because we need to move with the times. And if we can't afford to train our teachers properly, then maybe we need to be creative in other ways to still make things happen.
And I suppose that comes back to your trust point,
Yeah.
doesn't it? That we have to build a culture where not only do the teachers trust the students who are capable and able to move things forward, but they also feel that they can trust and feel safe in using the technology to support that use. And we've got a question that's come in from Tim Burnett, actually our former chair, that says, what do you think is the biggest mistake made by EdTech providers that you've seen in your, are there some assumptions that they make? Are there mistakes that they've made in trying to implement EdTech in your view?
I think there's something very difficult. So I do some work with some startups, with some really brilliant people in EdTech, right? But they inevitably fall back into the old-fashioned business model. So they start up because they want to make a difference. But in order to keep going and in order to attract the funding, they need to behave in certain ways. Sounds familiar, doesn't it?
Yes.
They need to behave in certain ways. So they have to conform to the norm. And therefore, it will take some very brave people to keep focusing on return on involvement rather than just return on investment. Because in the end, what will make the difference? What will make the EdTech product commercially successful in the long run? That will be how good it is.
Yes. And what sort of impact it can deliver pedagogically.
So part of it is, I think, Tim, is about that almost inevitable short-termism that is linked to business plans and funding. And the other thing is this pretends, and people just need to be a little bit more truthful about these things and a bit more transparent. This pretends that my product will solve all your problems. It'll do your ironing and your shopping. It'll keep the dogs quiet. It'll educate your children. At some point, we need to look at a child's education as a very big picture. And if we get the right pieces of the jigsaw, we will be able to see the picture. It'll be bright and brilliant. So if I'm an EdTech firm, I need to turn around and say, I can do that bit. And I've met a few people who can do that bit. We need to start talking about the children rather than the product. Just like we need to start to talk about the children rather than DFE, Ofsted, national curriculum. We need child focused, and that's what they need to do.
No, absolutely agree with that. We've got, I think we'll have time for, we're running a little bit late, but one more question, which has come into us via Twitter. So I'm not exactly sure who's posted this question, so my apologies for not acknowledging this. So the question that's come in from Twitter is, what next in terms of your points about inspection and education reform? That is quite a big topic. And just to add to that, and I think you and I had a similar interest in this, because you referenced Estelle Morris in your presentation. She's one of my very, very small group of political heroes, because I was still teaching when she was Secretary of State for Education. And I was listening to her in an event the other day. Why are we so obsessed about age-related assessment? Why do we deliver assessments at age 11, age 16, age 18, when the kids may not be ready for that? And I think that goes back to this question that's come in from Twitter. How do we move things forward with inspections and education reform if we are so transfixed on the rationale for a lot of that being based on the sort of 19th century education model? How do we break out of that?
It's a very, I mean, we'd need a session on our own on that one. But thank you for the question, because it's of course it's incredibly valid. I'm going to make a point now that I think there's no way that you cannot be not political. I think we need to change the government, right? End of story. Because I think whatever I think of the current government, and it isn't very much, but anybody will run out of steam after a decade. I I think we need new relationships between the professions and government, and we need trust in this. And I'm not sure, for example, that the trade unions are the right people to do that. I still advocate that idea of a British Medical Association for teachers. I know there was an attempt on that some years ago under the Blair and Brown governments. Just the fact that it didn't work perfectly in those days doesn't mean that we shouldn't have another go. But the answer is you need to be in charge and accountable our children's futures and destinies. We need to be accountable not to the system, but to the child. And we need to take the public with us on this. We need to take the parents, rather than build fences and have one parents' evening a year, we need to take those people with us. So daft as that may sound, part of this is an evidence-based PR exercise whereby we convince the country that we know best, because you know what? We do.
Yes.
Ofsted, just get rid of it. Right? Just get rid of it. It's just pointless.
But two interesting points just to close is I think they're going back to Estelle Morris again. So something else she said in this same presentation that I heard her give a couple of weeks ago was actually when you look at policy changes that have had the most impact, they've often involved pedagogists and politicians rather than being purely led by politicians, because, politicians don't know the ins and outs of delivering good education policy. They know what sounds good and they know they're motivated by what will win them votes. Pedagogists can help balance that with the pedagogical delivery piece.
They don't tell people how to fly a plane, do they?
No, exactly. But they do regulate how people flying planes, do that, and I think that's fine. Yeah. But they need to be involved. Pedagogists need to be involved in the discussions, and in the same way, people who focus on edtech technologies need to be involved in those discussions so that they can leverage that. The other point I was going to make, which goes back to your point about involving parents, I think there's a really, really good edtech related example, reassessment related example of that, and that's what the Welsh Government have done with their national tests. So move them away from being purely summative, all about accountability for the teachers and the schools, and very little about the students, to now being much more formative, much more focused on helping the students progress on their learning journey. And that was a very active move on their part. But they knew it was important to bring the parents along with them, otherwise that trust element would be lost between.
It's like, Matt, it's like the brilliant work that in early years that the people at Reggio Emilia are doing, Carla Rinaldi and all of her crew. That has to continue beyond the age of 5. Yes. Because and yes, you can have some testing in there and all sorts, but the aim of that whole thing is it serves the child.
Yes. And I think the big takeaway from me from everything that we've been talking about, and it's been really, really great talking to you, and it's been worth running over a few minutes in order to explore some of this a little bit more. But the big issue, the big thing that I take away from this is trust. The system has to be trustful of the expertise of teachers to deliver good teaching, the technology providers in providing technology that can help the children move forward. We all need to trust each other in order to be able to work together and move all of this forward. And I think that's a really, really interesting point. Thank you, Ger, for a really insightful and interesting keynote. Really, really great. And thank you for taking the time to join us today.
My pleasure. Thanks, Matt.
All right, no problem at all. Speak again soon. So that was the keynote. Really, really great, and thank you for the people who submitted questions for taking the time to do that. If I could have my slides back up on the screen, we'll take you through just a few more bits, really looking back at some of the key activities that we've as an association have done over the last year, and then looking forward to 2023. There's quite a lot of stuff to talk about if we look back at this year. This year, one of the big things for the association was our first in-person conference held in London in June. And for those of you who came along, thank you for doing so, particularly given that we were beset with problems with national rail strikes here in England at the time that we were delivering the conference. It really great. I'm not going to go into all the details that you can see on the screen there, but some highlights for me in looking back at this year's conference was the really great to see the international engagement with the conference continued. We had delegates, as you can see there, from obviously from the UK, from Europe, US, Canada, Australia, the Middle East, and India. And it was great to have all of those international perspectives come together to share case studies, stories of best practice through the conference. It's also the conference now appealing to right across the different sectors of educational assessment. And again, I won't go into all the details, but you can see some examples there on the lists of some leading universities who've engaged with this, leading exam awarding bodies and professional bodies engaging with the conference, and also test providers and research organizations. So if you weren't able to join us at this year's conference, I would urge you to try and get to the conference in 2023, and more about that in a little bit, as it is a great way to be able to learn about what's happening right around the globe in the world of e-assessment. Some of the other things that we were doing last year, so we had a range of other events that we either arranged or took part in. So again, I won't go through the whole list. There are a couple of things to highlight though. The BET show, for those of you who go to that each year, is a very large EdTech focused conference in London with about 30,000 people attending. We had 4 eAA facilitated sessions there, excuse me, this year, which was fantastic and really started to spread awareness of how technology can help education in both formative and summative examples. We had a range of events that were focused on showcasing examples of best practice that come through our awards program, and I'll talk a little bit more about next year's award program in a second. And it was also really great to be invited back for a second time to speak at the Ofqual, who are the England exam regulator, their annual all-staff conference. This year we talked about the topic of online proctoring, something that I know is of great interest to a large number of our members. And it was fantastic that Ofqual really wanted to engage with that and to see an exam regulator trying to grasp that as a standard for moving forward. We also started to ramp up our engagement with our members. So we increased the number of our member newsletters from 4 to 5 a year. And in fact, as I'll mention in a minute, we are increasing that further going into next year. And we also launched a new assessment organization network to give assessment organizations from around the world the opportunity to come together and to share ideas about the use of e-assessment. So that was last year. Let's look ahead at some key things coming up in 2023. Well, as I mentioned, the conference will come round in June. So the 6th and 7th of June in central London, exactly the same venue as it was last year. If you didn't engage with the conference last year, then please do engage with it this year. And if you can join us, that would be fantastic. It'd be really great to see you there. We also, of course, run an awards program alongside that, and we'll be opening entries. The entries will open for that on the 12th of this month, so just a few days' time. The awards are a fantastic opportunity to showcase good examples of where technology is being used to support assessment and the assessment process. And we really actively encourage submissions from everybody, anybody who's doing a really interesting project or something that they feel is worthy of sharing with other people. Please enter the awards. It's a great way of building shared understanding of what's possible. And last year we had entries from right around the world, from a range of different countries. So it's a great international mechanism through which we can share best practice. So key date to remember, 12th of this month is when the awards entries open. A number of other things happening as we look forward. So we'll be doing more sessions at the BET show on the 29th to 31st of March. We'll have our own conference, as mentioned, on the 6th and 7th of June. We're involved in a webinar series which is run by a university in Australia called the Transforming Assessment webinar series, and they'll be showcasing some of the winners from this year, from 2023's awards program, and then we'll be participating in a range of other events as well. As I mentioned earlier, we're increasing the number of our member newsletters to 6 in 2023, so they'll be going out on a bi-monthly basis, and then every other month we're looking to run a series of podcast events where we'll be focused on relevant topics to the e-assessment and assessment industries. And we're also relaunching our online proctoring special interest group in January. So if that is an area that you'd like to get involved in, please go to our website. You'll see a link to the what's currently called the remote proctoring special interest group, and you can register your interest in becoming involved through that process. So now, in the closing minutes of the session, we come to the People's Choice Award. So the People's Choice Award is brand new category, as I mentioned at the start, for this year. We're really grateful to the British Council for sponsoring this particular award. The purpose of the award is to highlight and applaud the project that people of all of our award winners from our 2022 awards series that they thought was the best project. So specifically focused on the 7 project award categories that we run through the general awards program, and allowing the public to have a chance to vote on which of those projects they felt was the best, perhaps because of its impact in education, or on the way or approach that it took to solving a particular problem. So I want to take this opportunity to announce the results, and I have to say this year that it was very close. There was literally, I think, 4 or 5 votes between first and second place, but the winners of this year's People's Choice Award are the Maulana Abdul Kalam Azad University of Technology, who entered the awards in the Best Summative Assessment Project, and who've been chosen by the general public as the best project out of all of our award categories. As I said, it was very close, just literally 4 or 5 votes between first and second place. So thank you to everybody who participated. There were well over 1,000 votes cast in this particular award category. Very grateful for everyone who took the time to cast their votes, and many congratulations to the team who delivered the solution to the university. And so all that's left for me to do is to say a very big thank you to everybody who's joined us today. Thank you to our sponsors for all their support through the year, and thank you to all of our members who have actively engaged with the association, who've received and appreciated the newsletters and come and seen and talked to us at the various events that we do through the year. On the screen at the moment is our leadership team. So a very happy and Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year to everybody from our leadership team. So Graham Hudson, who's the chair, Paul Muir, who's the vice chair, myself as chief executive, Karen, who's our marketing and events manager, Anna, who's our marketing administration coordinator, and Tracy Shrimpton, who is our marketing consultant. Very Merry Christmas to you all. It seems almost a bit too early still to be saying that, but all the same, very Merry Christmas and best wishes for 2023. And thank you again for joining us today, and again to Professor Dr. Ger Graus OBE for delivering what was a tremendously insightful and thought-provoking keynote. Thank you, and we look forward to seeing you all at another event as we move forward into the new year.